Hello class, welcome to Supply and Demand Lesson 1. This lesson answers the question, why is mastering supply and demand so hard? It should be simple, but there's a stumbling block from the get-go that gets most students. Students confuse the idea of a demand curve with the idea of quantity demanded and, of course, the idea of a supply curve with the idea of quantity supplied. It seems really simple, but actually it's easy to get it wrong. Consider this little true-false test. The first question is, demand goes up, therefore price goes up. That seems true, doesn't it? Demand goes up, therefore price goes up. And the second statement, price goes up, therefore demand goes down. In the first case, they move together. Demand goes up and price goes up. And in the second case, they move in opposite directions. It's logically inconsistent. Each statement seems true on its own, but when you consider them together, something is wrong. The thing that's wrong is this word demand. It has two different meanings in these statements, and it generates a lot of confusion for students. In this first statement, that word demand refers to a desire or an intensity of something, how much you want a thing. You desire it more, therefore its price goes up. You want it more, therefore its price goes up. In the second case, this word demand doesn't refer to desire or wants at all. In this case, it just says that the price goes up, therefore you buy less. Demand goes down, you bought less. So this word demand refers to an amount, and this word demand refers to a desire or an intensity. You can't believe how much confusion that's caused students who are first studying economics. Okay, so in the first case, that word demand, in the formal language of economics, we say instead demand curve. So when you're referring to a desire or an intensity, you should use the term demand curve. In the second case, when you're referring to an amount, how many people bought, you should use the term quantity demanded. Never ever use the word demand by itself is a very good rule. So I forgot about this slide. In this second statement, you'll notice that the price goes up, therefore quantity demanded goes down, but it doesn't say anything about the demand curve. The demand curve actually stays the same, and I have a slide coming up in a moment that will drive that point home, I hope. So here's the definition. A demand curve is a schedule of prices and all of the corresponding quantities demanded. You can think of it as a graph like this, or you can think of it truly as a table, a schedule of prices and quantities demanded, and this is just an example. Or you could think of it as an equation. QD equals 50 minus 2P is an equation that describes these numbers right here, and if I had drawn this out on graph paper, we could draw this demand curve in such a way that it also describes exactly these numbers. Each of these is a demand curve. This one's obvious, but this is also a demand curve because it meets the definition of a schedule of prices and all the corresponding quantities demanded. And this thing is also a demand curve because it also meets that definition. The same is true about a supply curve. A supply curve is a schedule of prices and all the corresponding quantities supplied. Normally we draw a supply curve like this, but you could draw it as a table. Here's just a sample of numbers that would map out a supply curve, and here is the equation that describes these ordered pairs. So this equation and this table of numbers and this supply curve over here are all supply curves in the sense that they meet the definition of a schedule of prices and the corresponding quantities supplied. Now, going back to the demand curve, if we pick some price, all right, and we picked two prices. In the first case, at this price, this is the quantity demanded. It is, after all, a schedule of prices, all of the prices. So in this case, this is the corresponding quantity demanded, and in this case, it's more. Notice that when the price went down, quantity demanded went up, but nothing really happened to the demand curve at all. The demand curve, or that schedule of all the possible prices and the corresponding quantities demanded, is unchanged. We can do the same thing for the supply curve. Here's two prices, right? Now when the price goes down, quantity supplied falls, right? But this schedule of all the possible prices and corresponding quantity supplied doesn't move at all. So there is an unfortunate economic tradition, and that tradition is that this word demand, when an economist, especially a microeconomist, uses that word demand by itself, they always mean demand curve. If you see the word supply that is written or spoken by an economist, they always mean supply curve. The problem is that the journalists who write the articles about business don't follow this tradition, and sometimes they'll use this word demand and they'll mean that schedule of prices and corresponding quantities demanded, and sometimes they'll just mean an amount. They have no discipline about those words. So my advice to you is never ever use the word demand or the word supply by itself. Instead, use the term quantity demanded and demand, or quantity supplied and supply. That will keep you, at least probably 95% of the time, from making this confusion. Never use that word or this word by itself. Okay, so that's the end of this lesson. And in the next lesson, we'll move to the things that actually can cause the demand curve and the supply curve to move. I hope you found this helpful.